Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Shiben Banerjee. I'm one of the 9 students part of this class group that has worked on a series of economic development proposals for the North End. Before we begin, I just wanted to introduce my colleague Anas, who is from MIT's Opencourseware. Opencourseware is a great resource that MIT developed a few years ago to take some of the ideas that are generated in our classes and make them available to the world through the World Wide Web. It's a great way this particular class has been able to assist other similar communities across the US. And so I just want to let you know that filming is taking place right now. If anyone would like not to be a part of the film, could they let us know, preferably now, and we'll make sure not to capture you as a part of the record of this meeting.
We have some bags at the back.
Right, alternatively. But if anybody has any other concerns or questions, please feel free to ask either me or Alice about that. So I guess the first thing I wanted to say is thank you really for coming out this afternoon. I'm glad the impending snowstorm did not come a day early, and it's just wonderful to see all of you here. Many of us have been in conversation for a long time now over these last 3 months. And I just wanted to say that on behalf of all the students, we have really enjoyed and got a lot out of this process, working with the community and talking to the leaders and representatives of a variety of agencies and private sector firms, not just in the North End or in Springfield, but really in the region at the level of the state. So thank you, and thank you for sharing your sense of dedication and concern for this particular community. It's been inspirational for us as a bunch of second-year students who, in about 6 months' time, will graduate and go into the real world of community economic development. There are a few things on the agenda for today that I want to make you aware of. We want to very quickly lay out some of the findings that we came across very early in our research process for this project, particularly through interviews and meetings with stakeholders in the community and in Springfield. And we want to move from there to our recommendations and spend some time talking about how we think economic development initiatives can be implemented in this particular community, given the resources and some of the constraints that we all are very familiar with. What we want to end this meeting with, though, is a real sense of agreement amongst ourselves on how to move forward. We have this list of suggested action items that we think the campus committee could address, some of them even as early as your next meeting in January. And what I hope we will be able to do by the end of our meeting today is talk about that and decide if those steps are indeed reasonable or not. I just also want to let you know that we've left copies of a feedback form in front of all the seats at this table. If anyone doesn't have a form, do let us know. We'll get you a copy. It will be very useful for you to share some of your reactions and reflections to what we present. And if you could just jot them down as you hear things or as you have questions, and then if you could hand them to us by the end of the day, that would be very useful by the end of the presentation. You do not have to feel obliged to identify yourself or your agency, however. Just one request to my colleagues, each of them when they come up here will introduce themselves, and at the end of this presentation when we sort of talk about the action items and clarify any of the questions or comments that you have, if you could do the same, introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. So again, my name is Shiben Banerjee, I'm one of the 9 students, and the first thing I wanted to do was to ask Alice to talk about. You're doing it. Anna's doing it. Too many A's. Sorry, to ask Anna Besky to come up into this. Thanks, sorry.
It's okay. We've only been together for a year and a half. Yeah. My name is Anna, and I'm one of the MIT students. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about how we came to this place, where we are today. Our work this semester fits into the broader 2003 strategic plan. I'm going to see this through. that you had. And you see the 4 targeted goals that you laid out were lifelong learning, economic development, which brings us here, health, and safety. Our mission this semester, our work, was to develop an economic development plan for the North End. And we were asked to include 2 very specific requirements. One was to use a population-based approach. This is the type of approach that NEON has very successfully used in the North End. And the second requirement we had for this plan, given to us, was to include concrete, actionable steps, which this group can appreciate, and we appreciate the necessity of those types of steps because that is what moves the process forward. So we've tried to do that. Given this task, this mission, we began to amass research and gather different types of information. One of the types of information we've done is quantitative information gathering and analysis, which have included employment, labor market analyses, commercial market analyses, and property surveys. We've also, as many of you in the room have been subjected to, over 40 interviews with stakeholders and interested parties, representatives from the city, from local, regional agencies that deal with business, economic development, workforce issues. We've also talked with schools and Bay State. In addition to these individual or small group interviews, we've also had 4 focus groups with the help of NEON staff and community residents where we've talked about business issues, we've talked about employment issues. And again, thanks to the tireless efforts of NEON, we've been able to collect over 100 responses from North End community members regarding different employment and business issues survey. So we had this large amount of information. Those of you that were with us in November at your campus committee meeting will remember we came to you with some initial findings, with some recommendations. And the 3 sort of common streams of economic development thought, which you see here, business development, workforce, and real estate, we were proposing that we pursue a 2-track economic development plan, addressing workforce and real estate. As a result of our meeting in November, this group, discussions both there and immediately afterward, you asked us to continue with our workforce development work, but instead to pursue business development as our 2nd track of that plan. And that is precisely what we've done.
I'm John. I know my own name, I think. I should be okay.
How long have you been together?
Can't divulge that information at the present time. We'd like to segue now into how we've really built a coherent strategy towards the goal of economic development for the North End, specifically around workforce and business development. So the question is, what programmatic activities are required in the community towards, again, greater goal of economic development that is community-wide? First, looking at workforce development, employer involvement in training curriculums. And this is happening in some places, but really across all areas. Really, I mean, it's a very sensible thing. We need employers involved in developing the curricula to train people who are going to work towards those positions. Second is the integration of skills and workforce training. Now, in this sense, vertical and horizontal integration, which, sorry, is a bit jargony. Vertical means really taking one person, one participant through the different levels of training, whereas horizontal means connecting across skills. So ESL is tied to job placement. But again, these things are interconnected and not disparate, as in some cases they often are. And third is an adult outreach capacity. As we're sitting in school right now, for youth, there is this built-in mechanism, which is school, to do some outreach, or through which to do outreach. For adults, that's a bit more of a challenge. And I think that's a real programmatic activity that needs to happen in the North End. I'd like to read a quote. As you'll see, our friendly Springfield workforce training professional, represented by a circle and a triangle. As we said, we talked to so many people, and we pulled out a couple quotes that we think are real emblematic of people's senses of economic development in the community. And this one is, there are too many providers, all with their own funding, not talking to each other, and there isn't enough government money to cover the local needs. And yet, what this shows is that technical assistance, workforce development services exist in this neighborhood. The question is really how to connect them to each other, and how to connect them to potential participants. In business development, again, what are the kind of the programmatic needs for, again, community-wide economic development? First is North End specific business opportunities, and these are opportunities for both existing businesses and potential businesses. Onto a lot of really aspiring kind of entrepreneurs in the community, as well as existing entrepreneurs. And not to say their growth is stunted, but there are obstacles to their development. Focused North End business outreach. This means businesses talking to one another and service providers for businesses talking to their constituents. And again, this goes both ways. It means business owners going upwards to assistance providers and assistance providers going down to the level of business owners. And again, just creating this interconnectedness. 3 is Main Street business cooperation. A lot of people in this room have talked about really the desire to create on Main Street a real commercial thriving corridor. And lots of things go into a program like that. And I think number 1 is creating greater cooperation among the businesses that are there. I think that's pretty self-evident. And finally is community control of property. Again, something that many people in this room have expressed as a major concern. How do people who really matter in the community get involved in planning and development? How do you take control of the physical assets of the community? And that's something that is really critical to long-term economic development. And again, this was somewhat periphery to our mission, but we tried to address it somewhat, especially in kind of long-term vision for how you can begin to think about that. And second quote from conveniently an aspiring North End entrepreneur. And though the symbol is the same, this is not the same person as the other quote, just to be clear. I don't know how things work here. I don't know how to start a business. I don't know anything. If there was an assistance person at Neon, I would even pay for this kind of assistance. So again, the idea that there is desire out there. There are people who are looking to start businesses. There are people looking to expand their current businesses, and they don't just don't necessarily know how to go about that. So to meet these programmatic needs, which we just identified in the community for economic development, how do we go about doing that? I think this is really the crux of a lot of what we're recommending, and that is we need a core staff devoted to economic development in the North End specifically that are working on these issues. I think, again, just to reiterate, the key is that they're dedicated. We have found a lot of people, so a lot of people in this room, a lot of people outside this room are working on issues either around economic development or critical to economic development. They're not necessarily coordinated, and they're not housed, they're not interconnected in a manner that really gets to some of the root of what are the issues in the North End. They might be Springfield-wide, they might be regional, they might be looking at just workforce development or just some issues for business, but there isn't this interconnectedness that is, again, sorry to repeat myself, that's solely focused on economic development for the North End. And also critically, that there is not this core staff that is responsive to the needs of the community. As we all know, things on the ground change constantly, and without this professional staff that is constantly, their mission is solely economic development, it's just impossible. I mean, people have too many other things going on in their everyday lives, in their workforce lives, to be attuned to the changing realities on the ground, and to really be responsive to what the economic development needs of the community are. Just to kind of flesh out what this means a little bit, again, planning across organizations. So this is really leveraging resources to bridge, creating bridges across organizations. And as we all know in our work, I mean, we're all sitting here, people from different organizations. By working together, you really do leverage your resources and your capacities. And resident outreach. I think we're going to set and talk a bit more about kind of the models that we see to achieve these ends. But it's really looking at a person-by-person case management, not just we're going to do some workforce training with them, but segueing that into maybe business development, but really taking people vertically through a hierarchy and staying with them in a case management approach. And with that, I'll turn over to Seth, who's going to discuss more how we're going to be thinking about fleshing out case capacities in a more coherent way.
Thanks, John. My name is Seth Pipkin, another student in this group, of course. And so as John just explained, these programmatic needs and the consequent institutional needs to execute on these programs, I'm going to get more into the specifics of what we're saying when we talk about institutional capacity. First of all, what I want to say is that when we were thinking about the subject of institutional capacity in the North End, we realized there are two great examples that are very applicable to the issue of economic development that can be brought to bear more on that topic. That is the campus committee itself and NEON. Now, what we have in the campus committee is actually a pretty extraordinary confluence of groups because there are such different types. There are different sectors and they're on different scales. We have local grassroots social service agencies at the same table as large local corporations, government agencies, economic development commissions, and they're all speaking together and they're all working towards coherence on ideas about this community. So the result that we have here is a productive collaborative dialogue. Secondly, NEON is also important to highlight how that's a product of collaboration in the North End. We have 5 organizations coming together to form one outreach group to serve all of their missions. Not only that, it does so through an innovative strategy that has been proven to have very important effects, having the rate of uninsured residents in the area. So what we have are 2 primary lessons from these groups. One of collaboration bringing greater results than individual efforts, and the other being a case-based approach producing significant results in a community that in other contexts is considered isolated. So what we want to do in terms of talking about these institutional capacities is apply these lessons to an institutional arrangement that we're proposing to you. So if we can move along. This is our basic overview map of this institutional arrangement. What we're saying is that there needs to be, as John said, dedicated core staffing to this topic. There are professionals with training in economic development, and their job task is to think about economic development in North End wide. They, in a sense, will be operationalizing the mission of the campus group and carrying out the vision of this group, giving that in return. There's this implementation of what's talked about here, what's brought about in this very diverse dialogue. To carry out those plans, they're going to work with employers and service providers, as well as NEON. The reason we break out NEON is that we're saying for every activity that this staff carries out, there's going to be an outreach component, whether that's workforce development or business development or some other theme that the organization takes on in the future. So in terms of NEON, part of this staff's initial mission we're recommending is to fulfill the original goal of NEON, to be a staff of at least 10 that can really undertake a full-on case-based approach throughout the neighborhood. And in return, what we have is this feedback that is so crucial to the implementation of economic development in this area. Information from the people on the ground who are the beneficiaries of this. And that's integrated into the planning process and brought to bear with partners who come to the table, give support to a North End-wide agenda, donate their time, their thought, their effort to collaborating, and in turn receive information and resources from this staff that's both in the form of human and financial resources through the planning efforts. Now, so this is sort of a static representation of the institutional relationship. On the next slide, this is an outline of how these relationships work over time to accomplish the goals that you've asked us to suggest how to accomplish. It starts with convening the service providers. That's the first step, to bring everyone together with the goal of saying, what's needed here? Where are you short on funds? Where are you unable to find out where your beneficiaries are, or what's unclear to you about their needs, or what are perplexities of increasing success rates of your program? Those identified needs will be brought to bear on the outreach efforts of an expanded NEON. So this organization will go out into the community and ask the questions necessary to solve some of these riddles, or hopefully solve some of these riddles that exist within the confines of the service agency walls, to go to the households of these people and ask, where are their gaps? This will have a dual result of increasing participation and also getting information on reasons for non-participation. which is important because that gives the information necessary to create an adaptation of the programs to meet the North End specific needs, the needs of this community that are specific to its space, its population, and its history. That's going to come from the outreach, and that's going to help service providers adapt their programs to better results. So I'll have increased participation and adapted curriculum that is owned by the North End. After that's accomplished, you can carry out an impact evaluation. Put into numbers. What are the differences now that you've harmonized all these different efforts and brought in the citizen feedback on how the programs are designed? You can start to say how many more people are working, how many more people are starting businesses, what are the numbers on this? And that is the basis for producing a case to have a greater aggregate amount of resources coming to the community than was here before. That can lead to a fundraising strategy with private foundations that ultimately, as I said, increases the total resources. And before I move on, I want to mention that something that's important to our recommendations is that we think there should be an explicit relationship between this professional staff and local corporate community benefits boards, because this is economic development. And local companies, corporations are necessary to collaborate on this, and these community benefits programs are directly pertinent, and in fact, their whole goal is to get this kind of feedback that this system is being set to provide. So, this is in case I didn't make it clear. And I also wanted to check. I sort of laid out a lot of steps here and a lot of relationships, so I just, if you all can nod or shake your heads if this all seems coherent, if I can move on, or if I should step back a little and review how this all adds up. Fairly neat.
Clarify who the service providers that you're referencing are in the product.
Yes. Well, I'll give examples, and this can be applied to other thematic areas, but within the workforce development area, you have training agencies. Some of them are members of the campus committee, such as the Gray House. So organizations like that would come to the table and say, these are where people are coming in. Maybe we don't know certain things about where they're moving on to. We don't have the capacity to track that. We want to know that. And talk to other service providers. But also, there will be gaps that will be filled by some service providers at the table. But what we're also saying is, some information that everyone wants will not be held by anyone at the table. And that's when community outreach will be utilized. So these service providers are the actual agencies providing services to the beneficiaries, social service programs. Is that more or less?
Is that what you were talking about, or you mentioned the 5 group?
Well, I was trying to differentiate between broad-based social service organizations and economic development, workforce development organizations. So
Yeah, that would shift. I think my classmates are in agreement with me on this. That would shift from initiative to initiative. So this economic development staff is going to, according to its capacity, work on a theme such as workforce development and business development and others. So when you talk, say, workforce development, it will bring trainers to the table as well as broad-based social service organizations insofar as they have efforts that apply to workforce development. So we're saying this should be the mission of these efforts. I don't think I need to read it out loud for you. So this stands for itself, and we're saying that this is sort of the concretizing statement that's a summation of all of these things we're recommending. So what does this mean in terms of the structure of the organization itself? We're saying that the best mechanism to carry out these goals is an organization. It is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We have a tentative title of Puente, the Bridge, because this is a bridging effort across social service agency efforts in the North End. We're saying that this organization has its own board of directors. It has an executive director and a program manager. The executive director, of course, is accountable to the vision and overarching efforts of the group, and the program manager assists the executive director in this. This is not the long-term staffing structure of the organization. What we're saying instead is that this organization should be started with this staffing structure. It should answer directly to the North End Campus Committee as, in some way, as an advisory board. It depends on the specifics of the kind of bylaws you will want to set up for this. And it'll have horizontal relationships with other social service agencies and with NEON, which we gave a special presence on this slide because, as I said previously, we believe that every economic development effort that's undertaken by this should involve outreach. So NEON is, for all intents and purposes, always in there, but a separate, distinct organization. What are the resource needs of this group? We're saying this 501c3 will have a startup phase of 5 years. And at the beginning, we'll have staff salaries and overhead needs of $120,000, $180,000 range for the 2 staff. Now this staff, their seed funding will come from whatever corporate community benefits programs can be solicited for assistance in this. And in those 5 years, the initial 2 staff will be working on ramping up the programs to get the support necessary through private foundation grants to expand the staff and to fulfill the long-term goals of this organization. And for the time being, we recommend that it be located on the campus. So what we have here is an outline of the institution, its relationship to other institutions, and what's going to come next is we're going to have the remainder of the presentation be outlining specific programs that start to become feasible when you have an institution like this, and specific ideas and suggestions we have for how this can be applied to meeting the goals set out by the campus community.
Are you saying that this organization, Puente, is solely an economic development organization? Is this just solely an economic development, or is this broader?
Well, it depends on your, I guess we should say it's solely economic development contingent upon how broad a definition of economic development we accept. And maybe any further elaboration on that should come in a discussion at the end. Because some of the programs will help you see what we're talking about, the breadth.
And there were 2 staff, you said, an executive type person and then a
Program director.
program director.
Yes.
So, and you're going to tell us about the programs?
Yes,
These are
that's
programs.
what's coming.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Thanks.
There are just a couple of things I wanted to reiterate from Stat's presentation. The organization would be its own standalone 501c3. We looked at a variety of organizational models. We thought that given the broad objectives laid out in some of the programmatic strategies that I'm going to just talk about in a second, the best implementation vehicle would be an independent entity that, very much like the campus committee, would not be exclusively identified with one particular agency, but would have the broad support of the entire community, as well as corporations that are headquartered in Springfield and regional economic development agencies that exist either serving Western Mass or even some of the new bi-state entities like the Planning Commission. Just to flesh out some of the things as we start getting into the programmatic areas that Jeff, you brought up, headed by an executive director whose responsibility obviously is to give leadership and shape to that organization, and assisted by a program manager who will actually be the one running not individual service-oriented programs, but I think assisting and collaborating with some of the employers and training providers in, say, the area of workforce development, as an example, and creating the material necessary to document the impact of these programs as a way of raising more funds. One of the issues that we kept confronting as we interviewed professionals and service providers in Springfield as a whole, and it's really a no-brainer, is that we're resource constrained. And obviously one of the ways of resolving that is to document the impact of a particular program, and so the program manager would really assist with that. And I would differentiate that role a little bit from the executive director, who, for example, we're recommending would sit on the Bay State Medical Center's Community Benefits Advisory Council. Every hospital within the Bay State Health System has a Community Benefits Advisory Council and files a community benefit report as a part of the public record every year. And we think that it would be an excellent achievement for this community to have an experienced economic development professional on that board, giving voice for the community on that board, and being able to shape some of the ways in which this excellent and burgeoning partnership between the community and Bay State can provide additional jobs and additional opportunities for growth and vibrance in the community. So I just want to lay out what the areas for program review and collaboration led by this new agency, the bridge organization we're calling Quantitative, will cover. In the Register of Business Development, it will be to try and create a pushcart program as well as a technical assistance hub, and perhaps over a longer horizon begin to address the question of land development and property control, particularly with an eye towards commercial properties or income-earning properties in general. On the workforce side, it's about producing more well-defined ESL programs that serve the particular needs of this community, rather than just look at the Puerto Rican community as an aggregate for the entire region or the state, or even at the Springfield level, sort of addressing some of the particular difficulties that Neon, for example, has well documented that are specific to this neighborhood. Provide training for people to get healthcare sector jobs, and assist some of the excellent initiatives that have already taken foot in this community around school-to-work transition and youth development. We've thought of some of the ways in which each of these prongs will play themselves out, and how that program manager, led by an exec director, will give shape to it. And I just wanted to ask Hania and then Amy to talk about, this time I actually know what I'm saying, ask Hania and Amy to talk about that in some detail.
My name is Tanya. I'm going to talk about the three components of the business development program that we have. The first component is a pushcart program. This is low-risk, low-cost retail program that we want to offer to informal businesses to start their businesses, as well as formal businesses and storefronts to expand their businesses. What we're thinking about is starting this by having probably the organization that we're suggesting being the lead organization to lease pushcarts to these informal businesses and storefronts. And we're going through mainly two phases of this pushcart program. The first phase is the more stabilizing one. We're suggesting having in front of the plaza in front of the campus, and having non-food items depending on what businesses can offer and what are the needs of some target population, like the Bay State residents. We suggest that we start with non-food items like flowers, jewelry, handicrafts, and then once we're stabilized, we can expand. We can expand by going more to food items, and this needs more or implies more logistical complications because of the permitting process. But also we can expand to the Bay State supply location in North Main Street. So what does the pushcart offer us? It's mainly it eliminates a barrier for informal businesses to start up, and also it allows the formal businesses to expand and to reach larger audience. As important, it gives life to the street of Main Street. It's just evidence, tangible evidence, very quick tangible evidence that there is a life, and for outsiders as well as for the community members themselves, that there is hope that things can be going on pretty in a one manner. The other thing that we're talking about is technical assistant help. And what we found through interviews and focus groups, that there are humongous resources with technical assistance provide that are available for businesses, and there is a humongous demand for these resources. However, we found that many informal businesses and businesses are not aware of the existence and availability of these resources. So how can we make the connection between these two? And what we're suggesting is having technical assistance hub, where a part-time staff member can not we're not looking for providing technical assistance to businesses. We're looking to providing information and referral to businesses where to go and how to go, and and also how to organize between these technical assistance agencies just for better networking. So this definitely eliminates a barrier to enter the market and or to do better in the market for all businesses. The third program that we're thinking about is a property control and development. Needless to say, Main Street specifically, it has serious problems, substandard properties as well as vacant properties. And these mean insecurity, at least in perception. And this is a serious problem that many business owners suffer from. So what we need, as John said, that we need to revise the zoning, what this community needs now, what are the demands and what's available. So also we need also rezoning, rethinking based on the current community needs. This is very long vision, and it's beyond the scope of our mandate, our work to go into rigorous study about this. However, we suggest two things. The first is exploring the opportunity of having MIT class next year to do this rigorous study about the real estate. And I think second thing is forming campus committee working group for property control. And this working group can decide who should take the lead in property control. Should it be the organization that we're suggesting to create, or should it be any other institution, either existing or new institution? And I cannot emphasize enough that this whoever takes the lead should organize well to take benefit of the numerous grants and resources available to improve substandard housing and properties on the national state and federal state federal state as well privately and publicly available. There's a need to improve the townscapes. There might be chances to use the historic buildings in the main street, and of course there's definite need for rezoning and rethinking the land use. This will eliminate the barriers for many business owners to enter the market, but it will also provide to the business owners, current business owners, stability in their businesses. And I'll leave it now.
I'm going to talk about our proposed strategies for dealing with workforce development. And the first one is dealing with English. As you know, the language barrier is a major challenge to people, to getting North End residents to be participating in the workforce and also in existing training programs. So to address this, we'd like to, in the short term, focus on using the resources that already exist at the campus to focus on ESL classes for particular groups of people. For example, men, also working people who already have a job to kind of get them to the next rung of the ESL and the training ladder. And also very basic English that's very vocationally focused from the start. So separating people that, for example, want to learn English to be able to help their kids with their homework from people who are really learning English, starting at the beginning, that want to eventually go into workforce training and into jobs. And also in the medium term, we want to build on the incredible success that Neon has had in case-based management in the healthcare realm and bring that into language learning. So that each language learner would have a case manager who would help them through the ESL process, from ESL through workforce development training, through job, and up through a couple of rings of the job ladder. Realizing that the ESL and language learning process is not something that can happen like in one course or even in 2 or 3 courses, but it's a process that's going to take several years to get people up to where they can really participate fully in the job market. And through all of this, Neon can be developing a lot of data and a lot of input that can inform a comprehensive strategy that this new organization can implement towards eliminating illiteracy and dealing with these barriers to English language learning in the North End. And also this data would provide a really strong argument they could use to leverage to get more resources from funders in the future. Secondly, we'd of course like to focus on healthcare careers. Healthcare is a growing sector, not just at Bay State, but also in the regional and the state and the national economy. And jobs in the healthcare industry pay a living wage, they're rewarding, they help serve the community, and they do have a recognized job ladder of increasing responsibility and increasing wages. And there are also a lot of existing training programs at STIG and CDI, all kinds of training providers in Springfield already. But a lot of them recruit mainly through schools and through youth programs, focusing on people that are coming out of high school. So we like to do two things to kind of better the connections between these existing training organizations and the North End residents. First of all, the campus could look at recruiting the recruiters for these organizations that usually go to the different high schools and try to get them focused in on the adult market of people that could be working in those jobs through the campus. And also, again, talking about the case-based approach, which would lead people through ESL, hopefully through workforce development programs when they're ready, and then up into the job ladder. And then thirdly, of course, investment in youth and education is kind of the most fundamental form of economic development. And there are also already a lot of initiatives on the table from Neon and New North about putting together mentorship programs for middle school students and also internship programs for high school students for youth development and to bring them, kind of into the workforce and kind of exploring different possibilities. And we'd like to kind of, build on that energy that's already there by suggesting some programmatic ways that program can come about. For example, just looking at different innovative strategies that similar communities in the North End have used, involving technology and ways to get kids involved and kids excited. And then also kind of just give some strategies for dealing with large corporations and funders and just kind of organizationally setting those programs up. And then also connecting those internships and those jobs to more fully to the regional economy and to jobs that those students would want to pursue after they graduate. So now I'll take it back to Ben, and we'll talk about how to kind of implement and steps for all this.
Well, this is what you really came for, right? Well, I just wanted to say there's sort of three things that have come up, I think, recurrently through this presentation, and that have really sort of driven us as we've thought about how to prepare an economic development plan for this community. One is the importance of outreach and having door-to-door contact with individual residents and households in this community. I can't even begin to express how impressed we've all been by the work that Neon has done in these years. And we think that it's an excellent model for taking on not just the ways in which this community has been plagued by health problems, but then also addressing economic and income disparities that residents in this neighborhood are really victims of. I think the second thing that has driven us is, and again, this comes out of our perception and understanding of Neon, is that every time agencies in this city, and specifically even in this neighborhood, have collaborated, the benefits to the community have been tremendous. The reduction of the uninsured rate, for example, what has begun to happen around incarceration transition, these are national models, and these are things that the community should hold their head up proud and be proud of. And the third thing really is that this engagement as a class has been very useful, not just to the 9 of us, but I think for years now, for the MIT students who have come through this program. And we thought that it was very important to build some kind of continuity, rather than just have us come in for a few weeks, suggest a few things, and then leave, take up a lot of your time, and then probably leave you hanging with very little. And so what we wanted to make sure was that we were going to leave you this time with an implementation vehicle that would build continuity based on some of the recommendations we've made today, but then also between classes offered by MIT and perhaps even other institutions that the campus and community collaborate with in the future. This was, of course, the idea of El Puente, and to make it happen, I have to confess, I come out of an architecture and construction management background. This sort of was the most intuitive way for me to express how to set deadlines for those of us who want to see this come together. I don't want to go down each individual line. I just want to bring your attention to a few things that I hope we're going to talk about during the Q&A that's going to come up in like 1 minute. The most important thing, obviously, is to get professional legal counsel. We have, within the 9 of us, and then also drawing from Caesar, Carl, and James, some experience and exposure with how nonprofit organizations are organized and how they are incorporated and how they sort of comply with statutory requirements. We're not experts, and we recognize that, and we urge you to, by the time you meet in January, have interviewed and decided upon a law firm that can provide some kind of pro bono counsel on this issue and help you get to the point where you need to be where you actually have a standalone 501c3. There are other things that come out of that. Again, the first few campus committee meetings in the new year, I think to spend time drafting up the statutes, the bylaws, the articles of incorporation that will govern El Puente, deciding what the accountability structure is, what the reporting procedures are very important. And I think that there are a lot of different directions that can take. Obviously, again, the advantage of having started with the discussion with the lawyer is you can get professional advice, you can have framework for that that's legally sound and that gives shape to the way in which you think this organization can be most responsive and responsible to the community. And then finally, I hope that at the very latest by the middle of next year, having gone through the process of drafting up the Articles of Incorporation, this organization will be ready to file for its federal tax exemption. That process in itself, quite lengthy. It can take anywhere between 3 to 6 months. And it produces something of a constraint on how to recruit staff, particularly those first 2 positions that we hope we funded through some seed money from community benefits programs. I would say that there's some flexibility though here. One of the options that we've considered, it's not really chalked up on this bar chart, but some of the options that we've considered would be to actually have like a fiscal conduit or a fiduciary, something similar to the Tides Foundation, if any of you are familiar with that organization, that actually provides a number of support services, including a tax-exempt status to a fledgling organization, helps with payroll, helps with guiding statutory compliance. And again, I think a professional counsel on this matter will be much more useful than we can. We can really only direct you to the questions that we know need to be answered. So the option of going through something like the Tides Foundation is that you can actually have your executive staff brought on board earlier than the, say, fall of 2006, and with that begin the fundraising plan and the program development plan much earlier. But if that doesn't seem like a viable alternative, I think that what we find is that by the summer of '07, we can meet and sort of enjoy a good fiesta right here and say, wow, we've come a long way. We now have a core professional staff that's going to address some of the most important issues that this community has been grappling with for a long time. So that's it. I just wanted to say, that we are really, really very grateful to all of you, and particularly to Neon. I'm so sorry that the staff is not here with us. They were not just our client group, but they were colleagues and friends, and they took us into their homes and
They gave us fun.
And they gave us fun, and that's an ongoing joke, but most of it at my expense. But it's been a tremendously warm reception for all of us, and we're very grateful for that, and we're quite in awe. So I just want to open up for questions and some time to reflect on the things we've talked about and hopefully clarify some of the recommendations we've made.
Well, I want to thank you folks for coming to us, for participating with us, and for bringing up a million questions that we maybe had thought about and put away, maybe hadn't even thought about, and stirred up a lot of the stuff that we needed stirred up. And now it seems to me that what we have to do is look at what you said and unstir it. In other words, organize it and put it into action. And for this, we thank you very much. I think the heart of everything you've brought to us has to do with the first part, and that is getting started on a new way of doing business, and that is having some type of organizing principles around that we can start building on so that there's energy and vitality and action that keeps on going. And from my experience with all of us, the question of 501c3 is a critical question. I don't think that actually, if we brought together all of the important people that we had to bring together, we would know that that's what we wanted to do. And I think that that is really the next discussion. There are probably other ways, and as a matter of fact, the question of legal help would be very beneficial, or some other kind of help that could help us figure out what are the possibilities of bringing this together. How do we take all the people who have a stake in this and who want to participate in this and who want to make it go forward and figure out the very best way for us in particular to move ahead. And it may be a 501c3, it may not be. And I'd like to know what actually all the options are and how we could organize ourselves to take the next step. But the next step is really getting someone who's basically their sole responsibility is to move this work forward. We even have people in our community who are doing this. And if we can figure out how to make it all a coordinated effort, then I think that we're really ready to jump off into the next phase of this. So I want to thank you so much, because all of the questions and all of the things that you've raised with us have stimulated all kinds of thoughts and energy and activity in us, and we're very grateful.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, for the convenience of Opencourseware and some of us who have not had the chance to meet you earlier, it'd be very nice if you could introduce yourself, name, the agency you're affiliated with most closely. And also, just to reiterate that this is not the end of our engagement, even as a class. We are finalizing a formal report that describes a lot of what we've talked about in much greater detail and lays the case about why this particular arrangement, for example, with a little more evidence than what we were able to present given time constraints today. So especially since we have held back on finalizing that, so we heard from you, I think it's very important to get as many reactions out on the table. And also at the end of that, as Peter began the meeting by saying, to really get a sense of what the next step for this group is, because I think if there's some consensus and commitment to that today, we would like to be able to brandish that on the first page of the report, so it's there to remind you all hours of the day and